Chapter 23 The Rifle. The wolves returned the very next morning. Shortly after dawn, they leaped from the trees and started chasing a poor calf through the pasture. Ross managed to drive them off, but that night they returned again. The herd came stamping into the barn as the wolves left and trotted back to the fields. The cows were in shock. They refused to leave the barn. As this continued, the herd would produce less milk. The farm would lose money, and Mr. Sharif would send Ross back to the factory. Something had to be done. Knock, knock, knock. The dog barked at the children and opened the door. "How did you get all those scraps?" said Jaya. "Is everything okay?" said Jed. "I must speak with your father," said Ross. Mr. Sharif came into the door, and Ross explained the problem. At the first mention of wolves, he sent his children to their rooms, but the dog stayed. Oscar had no idea what the man and the robot were discussing, and his tail happily wagged as he stood beside them. However, his tail stopped wagging when Mr. Sharif handed Ross a rifle. The dog had seen the rifle in action, and it frightened him to his core. He scurried into the bushes and hid there, whispering and whimpering, while the conversation went on. "How and what do you mean you can't fire a rifle?" the man yelled. "Ross, you're a farmer now, and sometimes farmers have to kill animals." It was the first time Mr. Sharif had ever yelled at Ross. She waited patiently as words and spittle flew from his mouth. "My farm and my family are in danger, Ross. I order you to kill those wolves." "I cannot follow that order because I am not programmed to be violent." Mr. Sharif let out a heavy sigh. He knew Ross was right, but when he reached for the weapon, she couldn't let go. The man stared at the robot stared at the dog stared at the rifle. Oscar was still whimpering and hiding in the bushes. Just the sight of the rifle had sent him into a panic. It was hard to believe that such a fearful animal was related to wolves, but dogs were related to wolves. Though the robot and her computer brain began buzzing with activity, she thought of dogs and wolves and rifles. She thought of Shadow, the wolf leader, and the long straight scare on his side. And then she had an idea. "Although I cannot fire the rifle," said Ross, "I believe it can help me solve the wolf problem." Mr. Sharif frowned. He didn't know what the robot was getting out at, but he was happy to let her handle the wolves by herself. "Fine, try your way," he said. "Just don't lose any cows, or else we might have to lose a robot too." Chapter 24 The Bluff. The cows peered out from the barn at Ross. The robot was holding the rifle. She carried it to the far side of the pasture and placed it by her feet. Then she began coating herself with mud and grass, and suddenly, and probably to little cow dawned, when every inch of her body was concealed, she nestled down into the ground and became part of the landscape, an ordinary clump of grass. The cows were stunning. "What's Ross doing? Is she all right? Where did she go?" Ross had learned to camouflage herself back on the island, and now she was using that trick once again. She sat motionless for hours, waiting for the wolves to appear. Daylight faded. The stars came out. The moon climbed into the sky. But the wolves didn't show, so Ross tried something new. The robot was an excellent mimic, and she began crying out in a sad voice after a wounded cough. Please help me, she cried. I have hurt my leg and I cannot move. Crickets chirped. Please help me. An owl hooted. I cannot move. The calf's voice continued crying out. Finally, as the moon dipped behind the trees, 7 wolves stalked into the pasture. Shadow led the way, silent stalking through the night, covered in dark fur. He was practically invisible. Only his long, pale stare gave him away. Noses sniffed, eyes searched, our ears listened. Then a clump of grass began rustling. There, whispered Shadow. The calf was hiding in that tall grass. Something feels wrong to me, Shadow, said the female wolf. This is too easy. I make the decision. Barb snapped to the wolf leader. Slash, lurch, fang, circle around and wait for my signal. 3 wolves dashed off. When they were in position, Shadow gave the signal, and his pack closed in on the wounded calf. With each step, the grass rustled more and more, until the ground seemed to be moving, and then the ground really was moving. Grass and dirt crumbled aside, and there was a robot, standing tall, pointing the rifle at the wolf leader. The pack froze. Hello, Shadow, roared the robot. My name is Ross. I see from your scare that you are familiar with rifles. You can be shot at before. You know what will happen if I pull this trigger. Reader, you and I are well aware that our robot was not programmed to be violent. Ross couldn't have pulled that trigger if she wanted to. But she didn't want to. She was bluffing. Of course, Shadow didn't know any of this. As far as the wolf knew, he was defeated. And so he did what wolves do when they're defeated. He lay down and he called up before the robot. For the first time anyone could recall, the wolf leader looked weak. I do not want to hurt any wolves, Ross continued. But if you return to this farm, I will have no choice. Now, please leave and never come back. Shadow scrambled away with his tail between his legs. Barb was close behind him, followed by the other wolves. And soon the entire pack had disappeared into the night. Chapter 25. The Summer. Spring melted into summer, and the wolves were nowhere to be seen. Perhaps Ross had scared off the pack for good, or perhaps the heat was keeping them away. You see, it was the hottest time of year on the farm. The sun was scorching, the fields were baking, the pond was drying up, and full otters were floating all throughout the dairy. During dry spells, the farm's powerful sprayers were activated. Water shot out in long, misty arcs, and the land turned deeper shades of green. When the hay fields were lush and ready to be harvested, Ross fired up the mower and the baler. The giant machines rolled out of the shed and down the long driveway. Shortly afterward, they rolled back in, leaving bales of hay stranded across the stubbly fields. The cows and the humans spent hot days indoors. Only when the sun set and the air began to cool when they ventured outside. The herd strolled out to graze under the stars. The children ran out to chase fireflies, and sometimes even Mr. Sharif stepped out to stretch his stiff legs. Trees surged in the evening breeze. Lightning flickered on the horizon. Cicadas sang their summer songs. When Roz wasn't farming, she was searching for a way to escape. Everything hinged into the children. The robot needed their help, but she just couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. It was still too risky. Mr. Sharif asked the children not to distract Roz from her work, but they did it anyway. They sneaked out of the house and ordered the robot to play with them. Together they told stories, rode bicycles, lay in the grass watching fluffy clouds drift by. Summer was tornado season. On occasion, thick clouds would start funneling downward, reaching for the ground. So far, the funnel clouds had all receded back into the sky before doing any damage. But it was only a matter of time before a tornado touched down. Chapter 26: The Tornado. The weather forecasts warned of possible tornadoes that day, but despite their scientific equipment, experts still couldn't predict exactly when or where a tornado would strike. So most farmers carried on with their usual tasks, while keeping a watchful eye on the sky. Roz was out in the fields, loading hay bales onto the flapped truck as towering puffy clouds rose up from the smoke. Raindrops lightly tapped against her body, and she thought nothing of it. The wind began to blow, and still the robot continued with her work. It wasn't still the first flash of lightning that Roz finally called it quits. She climbed onto the back of the truck, and it automatically rolled across the hayfield toward the driveway. The storm developed quickly. Dark clouds started swirling and boogieing downward, lower and lower, like a giant twisting finger pointing at the countryside. A tornado was beginning to form. When the truck reached the driveway, Roz hollered, "Drive faster!" The engine revved, the tire kicked up gravel, and the robot held on tight. The funnel cloud continued stretching downward. It brushed the tree line, and the leaves exploded into the air. Each spin, then the tornado touched the ground. A siren sounded in the distance, but the tornado was growing noisier and angrier as it blew in from the fields, and the siren was quickly lowered to the howling winds. The truck charged up the driveway and into the cluster of farm buildings. Roz looked ahead at the house and saw frightened faces in the windows. "Go to the storm shelter," she hollered in her loudest voice when she leaped off the truck and ran to help the sheriffs. Leaves and sticks flew sideways, whispering against a robot's body, knocking her off balance. Behind her, the farm buildings rattled and groaned. The milking parlor was shaking violently when a long, terrible screech hit its entire roof, peeled off, and sailed away on the wind. Four blurry shapes appeared in the backyard. Mr. Sharif shielded his face and hobbled alongside the house toward the storm shelter. He threw open the door and waved everyone down the stairs. Oscar went first and Jaya, but Jed wasn't coming. It wasn't moving. Come on, Jed, yelled his father. The boy stood still, shaggy hair flying everywhere, and stared up at the tower, towering. He used to have nightmares about tornadoes, but this was no nightmare. It was real, and it was getting closer. The clouds swirled faster, the wind roared louder. The tree bent down to the ground. Jed suddenly felt strong arms around him, and Ross whisked him to safety. Mr. Sharif reached up from inside the shelter, desperately grasping for his son, and just about to thrust the boy inside his father's arms. A blast of wind slammed the shelter door closed and swept our robot away. At first, Ross didn't realize she was in a tornado. She kept expecting to fall back to the ground, but the wind only lifted her higher and higher. She saw the treetops and the rooftops, the faraway fields. More of the countryside came into view with each spin around the funnel cloud. Our robot's survival instincts were blaring in her head, urging her to protect herself. But what could she do? The tornado was in control. The wind whirled her up and around. Ross could almost imagine what it was like to fly, and she thought of Bright Bill. It seemed that her final moment would be spent in her son's airborne world. Ross wasn't the only thing swept away in the storm. Dust, gravel, leaves, branches, fence posts, and farm equipment were all swirling around with her. The robot was pelted by flying objects, big and small. She never even saw the shovel coming. The heavy tool wheeled around the tornado and clang! It hit the back of her head. Everything suddenly went dark, while Ross was still up in the sky.